Who say gentle means weak? Zhang Ruonan's damn power rise to 2 billion box office star, from should have been a boy to box office queen. The Zhang Ruonan story, I'll admit, the detail that stopped me cold wasn't the box office number. It was the name. Imagine growing up answering to a name that basically means, too bad you weren't a son. Hearing it called across the dinner table, written on your school report card, said by your own grandparents without a flicker of embarrassment. That's not a metaphor. That's literally how Zhang Ruonan started life, in a small village in Zhejiang. And 30 years later, that same girl became the reason a shoe company wanted her face on their campaign. There's something almost poetic, and honestly a bit uncomfortable to sit with, about a woman whose own name once carried the wish that she'd been born a son, now out-earning every one of her peers at the box office. In August 2026, when her films collectively crossed the 2 billion RMB mark, she became the first actress from the so-called post-95 generation to hit that number. The same month, footwear giant Bell announced her as brand ambassador. Nice timing, but honestly, nothing about this woman's career has ever really felt like luck to me. It reads more like 9 years of quietly refusing to disappear. Born in 1996 in a village in Yueqing, Zhejiang, she was originally named Ruonan, characters that essentially meant if only this had been a boy. Her grandparents wanted a grandson that badly. 3 daughters came first. The son didn't arrive until the 4th pregnancy. As the eldest girl, she grew up minding her younger siblings, doing the household chores nobody assigned her, but somehow always fell to her anyway, and quietly working for a kind of approval that was never actually promised to her. I keep coming back to what that must have felt like from the inside. Being maybe 7 or 8, folding laundry, or watching a younger sibling, and somewhere in the back of your head, knowing your own name is a small, permanent reminder that you weren't quite what the family ordered. Kids notice these things even when adults think they're too young to. They just don't always have the words for it yet. And what gets me is how undramatic this all is. There's no single cruel moment you can point to, no villain to blame. It's just the slow, accumulated weight of being the almost a son, almost enough, almost seen. A lot of women, especially from similar backgrounds across East and Southeast Asia, will read this and feel an uncomfortable jolt of recognition, even if their own families never said it out loud the way hers did with a literal name. She studied graphic design in Hangzhou and only entered modeling because a friend talked her into a campus beauty pageant. What kept her going wasn't ambition, it was money. Picture 8 straight hours under studio lights in a thin, cheap sweater, arms aching from holding poses, no real sense yet that any of this could become a career. Then picture holding your first proper paycheck and realizing your hands are actually shaking, not from excitement exactly, more like relief. Because that cash was going straight home, and it mattered more than any applause would have. There's a very unglamorous honesty in that image. No dream, no 5-year plan, just a young woman doing tiring, repetitive work because her family needed the money, and she happened to be the one who could earn it. A lot of overnight success stories conveniently skip this part, the long, gray stretch where the work is just work, nobody's clapping, and the dream, if there even is one yet, hasn't shown up to introduce itself. Director Guo Jingming spotted her in a modeling shoot and wanted her for So Young, So Wild, 2018. She turned him down, repeatedly, not out of arrogance, but something closer to genuine fear. No acting training, no confidence that she had whatever it was, and parents at home who weren't thrilled about the entertainment industry either. Can you imagine that pressure? A stranger insisting you're talented at something you're privately convinced you'll fail at, while your own family quietly hopes you'll say no? He didn't take no for an answer, and eventually she caved. What followed wasn't glamorous. She memorized her lines obsessively before filming even started. The way you'd cram for an exam, you were terrified of failing in public. The film's rooftop fall scene got redone so many times her knees bruised, and by most accounts she never once complained on set, which honestly, tells you as much about her upbringing as it does her work ethic. When you've grown up feeling like you have to earn your place, you don't ask for sympathy over sore knees. The film crossed 300 million RMB. Not bad for someone who, weeks earlier, genuinely believed she couldn't act at all. Getting famous young also meant facing public scrutiny young. In those early days, while her craft was still being sharpened, plenty of people rushed to label her, calling her a flower vase, industry slang for someone cast purely for looks, without seeing the quiet effort behind each role. There were also doubts about how she'd gotten her opportunities, even as she kept proving herself with results, year after year. Her fan base at the time skewed heavily male, and even her fan nickname became a talking point, even though the name itself had come from a genuinely heartfelt place. At one 2025 event, an estimated 90% of attendees were men, a figure some chose to spin negatively, rather than simply reading it as a sign of her broad, natural appeal. What actually got to me was the moment she finally addressed the fan name controversy on a variety show, and just teared up. Live, on camera, no script for that part. She explained the name's real origin. A devoted early fan who'd traveled from Fujian just to support her, who coined the nickname as a simple, affectionate pun. It wasn't calculated. It was a fan being sentimental, and years later, that same sentiment got twisted into a public accusation the actress had to answer for on television. There's something quietly unfair about that. A small, kind gesture from a stranger turning into a burden the person on stage has to carry and explain, tears and all, in front of millions. She renamed the fandom afterward to diffuse things. Whether that was necessary, or just one more exhausting compromise she didn't really owe anyone, is worth sitting with. In Your Wedding, 2021, she played a swimmer and insisted on filming an underwater shot herself, rather than handing it to a double. Staying submerged in deep water long enough that her ears started aching, just to get 15 seconds of footage right. 15 seconds. Most people would have called it in after take 3. That film became the highest-grossing single release among her generation of actresses at the time, pulling in over 800 million RMB. Then, in 2023's photo studio, she took on dual roles as a woman with dissociative identity. One gentle, one dark, and by most accounts threw herself into it, physically, take after take, in a way that sounds less like technique and more like something she needed to work through in her own body. The film scored well critically. By 2025's drama Cruel Romance, playing a withdrawn, traumatized character, there's a bathroom breakdown scene, her curled into a corner, crying without a sound, the kind of silence that's somehow louder than screaming, that state broadcasters later praised as a masterclass in portraying emotional fragility. Reading a description of that scene, I found myself wondering how much of her own childhood quiet made it into that corner. What strikes me across all 3 roles is the pattern. She kept choosing characters defined by quiet suffering and kept insisting on doing the physically punishing versions of those scenes herself rather than using a double. That's either a genuine artistic instinct, a calculated image strategy, or, more likely, both at once. Actors are allowed to be strategic and sincere simultaneously. We don't need to pick one. In July 2026, she starred in Miss You, a small female friendship drama with no major director attached and modest opening allocation, just 14.4% of opening day screenings. It still topped attendance rates and crossed 100 million RMB within 4 days. That was the film that pushed her past the 2 billion RMB career mark, making her the first in her generation to get there. With 3 of her films crossing 100 million RMB as lead actress, reportedly a distinction unmatched among her peers. The brand deals followed the numbers Givenchy, Proya, MLB, Jeep Jeans, and now Bell. Companies aren't just paying for her face, they're paying for a reputation as reliably low drama and consistent, which in an industry full of scandal is arguably its own kind of currency. If I'm being blunt about it, I don't think Zhang Ruonan's success came from one spectacular breakthrough. It came from a string of fairly level-headed choices, repeated over 9 years. The kind of thing the public tends to undervalue next to flashier, more dramatic stories. Compared to plenty of her peers who broke out through a single viral role or an attention-grabbing scandal, her path has been slower, quieter, but arguably more durable. And that, to me, is actually the more interesting story. That said, it's worth being fair and not applauding every choice unconditionally. Repeatedly taking on roles built around trauma, endurance, and quiet self-sacrifice, while clearly working as an acting strategy, could also be read as a fairly safe kind of image branding, less artistically risky than it appears on the surface. She's rarely stretched into comedy, morally complicated characters, or anything that departs from the fragile but resilient girl mold. That's a commercially effective image strategy, but it also raises a fair question. Is the public genuinely recognizing her acting talent, or rewarding a sympathetic personal narrative that she happens to fit, whether by coincidence or by design? I don't have a tidy answer to that question, and maybe I don't need one. But a tribute piece that never asks it would, to me, feel dishonest. She's spoken about not being able to afford rest, family expenses, siblings' tuition, the ordinary financial weight of being the eldest daughter who made it. What's notable is that she doesn't seem to perform the struggle for sympathy. She just keeps working. There's a temptation to wrap this story up as a tidy girl power arc, and honestly, that framing undersells it a bit. It's less about triumph and more about endurance. 9 years of being underestimated, named by her own families before she could even speak for herself, doubted by critics, and still showing up to redo the same painful scene one more time, because that's simply what the work asked of her. I think that's the part I actually sit with longest, more than the box office figures. Most of us, at some point, have felt like the almost in someone's story too. Almost enough, almost what was wanted, almost seen the way we hoped to be. Hers just happened to have a name attached to it. What she did with that isn't some tidy inspirational lesson. It's messier and more human than that. She didn't erase the hurt, she just kept working through it, scene after scene, year after year, until the world had no choice but to call her by the name she'd actually earned. The name Ruonan wished she were someone else entirely. She spent 9 quiet, stubborn years making sure the world remembered exactly who she was instead. If you ever got the chance to rename yourself, not on paper, but in how other people see you, what would you want to be remembered for?